Like, how can we support and let people explore without fearing that they're making mistakes?
The Change Podcast. Everything changes, everything stays the same. Welcome back to the Change Podcast.
Well, hello.
It's been a long time, 8 months in total, I think.
Yeah, lots of time has passed and we still got the same old janky setup, me holding the microphone.
Yes, Dad, of course, forgot to bring the mic stand again.
It's funny, we thought we could do all of this in a quick 20-minute setup and it's taken us over an hour, but we are here, we adapt, we overcome.
Yes.
Just to bring you the most high quality of podcasts, of listening material.
Well, it's been 8 months. We've been busy. I think we've decided we'd like to sort of launch into this again. We're going to do a soft launch, a bit of an update launch, but maybe we'll try and do a few more podcasts a little regularly in the weeks and months to come. So if you're back with us after 8 months, good to see you again and glad to have you with us.
Yeah, I think it's been a necessary amount of time, I think, too, because it's funny talking about your journey when you're in the midst of it. And a lot of like quick changes happen really early in the trans journey that are really easy to talk about. And then the more conceptual, like, I don't know, maybe subjective sense of self, background, psychological stuff happens. And it's not so easy to talk about because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But slowly piecing together all of that part of the journey and hopefully have some nice updates and insights for everyone at this point. But we've also both been very busy.
We have. I guess that's not a bad place to start with the personal stories. And
yeah,
I got a new job since last I was here. I was working at the Royal Commission before, and I then started at the University of Sydney back in October last year, which is, I think, about the time we did the last podcast.
Yeah.
So
congratulations.
I've been enjoying that.
It's amazing news.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting. I'm doing a job with the School of Health Sciences, Associate Professor, teaching disability studies and ethics and doing disability research. So
cool. And you've wanted a uni job for so long, so you're finally there.
Yeah, life takes you in strange, circuitous paths. I thought maybe my academic career was over when I left Alpha Crucis and dealt with the pain of the loss of that job. And here we are all this time back. In fact, I taught ethics again this year, which was really quite thrilling after really the ending of my previous job was to do with my ethical attitudes to LGBT inclusion. And I don't know if we've told that story before in this podcast, but we might have done. So it was...
For those who don't know, my dad's a heretic and caused a lot of drama amongst the Christian college community, I guess, by being supportive of my amazing community.
Yeah, look, I guess Christian circles are conservative places, have conservative attitudes to LGBT inclusion, and I don't for obvious reasons. So, but it was really thrilling, given that I guess the end of that career came to do with teaching ethics, to teach ethics again for the first time for young people at the University of Sydney, and I really loved it. So it was great. And you've also got yourself a new job, Jemma, since last we spoke.
I have, yes. An exciting new, my first full-time role ever.
It's about time at 28, 29 years old, isn't it?
Well, I thought I could get a few more years out of my studies. But yeah, leaving the PhD meant I had to really enter the workforce. There was no choices left for me. But I found an amazing opportunity with New South Wales Health. So I'm now working as a project officer. New South Wales Health has released their LGBTIQ plus strategy to make sure that across the state we're trying to meet the health needs of all of the whole LGBTIQ plus community, and make sure queer people are rating their health as equal with the general population. Um,
And
so
is it the case that health outcomes for queer people in Australia tend to be worse or on par with the straight population?
yeah, yeah. So it's true that LGBTIQ plus people rate their health lower overall and their well-being lower overall than the general population. Um, so the stat off the top of my head was that 80% of the general population rate their health and well-being as either good or very good, while only it's different for all of the different letters within the community. So I think like gay men and lesbians was around the 60 to 70% mark. Trans and gender diverse people was about 50%, and intersex people was 40%. So, yeah, particularly bad for trans and gender diverse and intersex peoples, those of us dealing with um, variations in either our sex or our gender. Uh, that seem to be such a difficulty for many conservative minds to get their head around, and therefore causes barriers to us in the health system. So it really is around like the experiences of discrimination and prejudice that we face in the world, and that therefore get carried over into our health experiences. It causes us
Yeah.
to not trust the health system and to avoid getting health care when we need it, until it becomes a crisis.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is also caught up in the mental health challenges that you'll have had. First of all, dealing with the psychological challenge of transition, and then dealing with the reaction or the response of the community to that transition. So I guess it's a combination of just the challenge of the transition itself, but then the way in which that transition is received by
Mm,
the communities in which we're a part and which we derive our well-being.
yeah. Yeah. And I think in a lot of cases too, it's the challenge of not even being able to transition,
Yeah,
as well. So, yeah, the stat from the health strategy is that 3 out of 4 transgender people have difficulty accessing gender affirming care, which is, a necessary piece of healthcare for us to have, to experience mental health, good mental health and well-being.
yeah,
And then, yeah, similarly for intersex people, is that a lot of healthcare professionals aren't familiar with their needs, and they've also been subjected to unnecessary health interventions in the past, such as involuntary surgeries when they were babies to quote unquote correct their genitals to
yeah,
make them fit into what is considered normal for male or female bodies. And so, yeah, really hard to feel good in your body when your body is constantly being subjected to medical scrutiny. And
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I could imagine conservatives saying, "Well, is the reason that the that sense of health and well-being is lower for transgender people because they've chosen to transition, and if they didn't make that choice, would their health be better?" How do you respond to that? Because there's different ways in which you can read
Mm.
health data, isn't there?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, it's a good question to bring up. I love that we're getting into this right now. Um,
That wasn't
didn't
our plan, was
didn't
it?
expect to go in this more scientific discussion, but yeah, I mean, the question about the evidence for gender affirming care being good for trans people or not, is kind of what is publicly being debated a lot around the world right now, particularly for young people. And in the UK, you might have heard there was a study that was recently financed by or funded, sorry, by the NHS over there, their National Health System, which was looking at the evidence for gender affirming care in young people. And their conclusions were that there aren't strong evidence in support of gender affirming care for young people. And so if you just read that at face value, that's a fairly alarming conclusion to make, and harmful for our community. The problem being that a fundamental position that they took before they conducted their research was that they didn't want to include lived experience in the research process because trying to avoid some kind of, they're trying to avoid bias
Yeah,
essentially in the findings. But it's interesting because in no other field of research do we exclude lived experience as a real point of expertise?
Well, on the contrary, in most other forms of research, we insist upon lived experience. So
Yeah.
certainly nowadays you cannot do First Nations research without including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And it's much the same in disability studies that we recognise that a person with lived expertise brings a knowledge and experience that a person who doesn't live with a disability to the study that makes the study really significant and gives it meaning and depth without which it doesn't have. And the whole question about whether including lived experience brings bias just forgets that there is a bias that people have who don't have lived experience as well. We all live with bias. And so all studies in that
Yes.
sense are subjective. It's about bringing that subjectivity to the forefront. And yeah, I can see to exclude people with lived experience from the research essentially skews the research results into a particular direction.
Yeah, it does. And the interesting thing about this review is that some of the researchers that they did include had also been involved personally in some of the anti-trans laws that had been introduced in the United States. So there is a definite bias in the opposite direction there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as a result,
And it didn't conclude that, it just concluded there wasn't enough evidence. So it didn't actually conclude that transgender and trans-affirming care was negative, even though the study was biased. It just says we don't have enough evidence. And so basically what it's done is it's excluded the evidence that was drawn from lived experience,
yeah,
which
of which there
recognized the
is a
value,
wealth.
and then said, once we exclude that, we don't have enough evidence to support it. So
Yeah.
essentially that's the way the study worked. Is that right? Is that my interpretation?
Yeah. So they've done a really good case of cherry picking here because there is an incredible wealth of information based on lived experience. And in the case of gender affirming care, where you're giving someone hormones or not, or in the case of young people giving them puberty blockers or not, you can't really hold this standard of double-blind, randomized, controlled trials because, well, for one, the moment you give a young person um, puberty blockers, it's going to become pretty
Yeah, you can't
noticeable
choose.
quickly
Yeah,
when they're
yeah,
either on a placebo or hormone blockers, um, and it's not ethical. So there's no actual way of conducting double-blind, randomized, controlled trials in gender-affirming care, and the other thing that they've ignored is the evidence against the contrary, which is that we've thoroughly researched gender disaffirming care for 30 to 40 years prior to undertaking research into gender affirming care. This hasn't come out of nowhere. It comes in a history of eliminating the rest of the options. And there's incredible evidence that gender disaffirming care, so things like conversion therapy or trying to get the person to accept that their gender identity is aligned with the sex that they're assigned at birth.
yeah,
All of these things are both ineffective, if not harmful,
yeah,
for young people and trans people. And so, gender affirming care, um, you know, is actually a necessary thing for trans people that we've come to. Where, as with all healthcare, the current model paradigm for healthcare is person-centered care,
yeah,
and we need to approach healthcare in a way that is working with the client and their experiences and treating them as the expert in their own life.
yeah,
Gender affirming care is very much aligned with that model, and so yeah, it's a shame that there is this kind of debate amongst the research when all you need is to have met a few trans people and see how happy it's made us, and what more evidence do you really need? It's an amazing journey, and it does, it's not without its difficulties, but these are difficulties that we can support people through rather than villainizing them
yeah,
for.
yeah, indeed. All right. Well, we did get sidetracked
We
down
did.
a rabbit hole, and I guess it's a rabbit hole that flows from the work that you're doing. So hence we can talk off the top of our head, and you're able to talk about those stats straight away. So we
Yes.
appreciate the depth of knowledge you're getting from that role.
Now you know that what I've been doing for the last 8 months.
Indeed.
Trying to do this work in Northern Sydney.
So, but let's just for the time we've got, let's have a bit of a conversation about your journey. So, I guess the place to start is last time we were together, we were dealing with, I think you'd had sort of, it was the 6 months since your bottom surgery. And
I think it was more like a year by that
right,
point.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since that point in time, have you had any other surgeries?
I have. I don't know if we spoke about this on the last podcast. We tried to work it out just before, but if not, um, yeah, in October last year, I had top surgery, or what would you call it? Breast augmentation.
Yeah.
Um,
And you did that because I guess estrogen, which you'd been taking, does or can produce breasts to different levels for different people. But for you, given your sort of height and things, it just wasn't producing a sufficiently feminine, noticeable result. Is that the reason you went down that path?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't feel very affirmed with the breast size that I had. I still felt very masculine in my body. Um, and yeah, it's been amazing. It was quite funny actually because the surgery itself was about the duration of a haircut.
Right.
It was so quick and it was a lot easier than the last surgery I'd had,
You
which is
did start
such a
things a
relief.
weird direction, Gemma. You started what some might say the wrong way around. You went the hardest surgery first, didn't you?
Yeah, but I was raised to do the hardest things first.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so that was amazing, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. I love my new boobs, and yeah, they just make my body look a lot more proportional. I definitely like they're bigger than I
It's
would
funny doing
have
a
picked.
podcast with a video going and we're talking about your boobs. So what are the people watching this? It's a weird thing, isn't it?
Yeah, bodies are
Anyway,
funny.
bodies.
Um, but yeah, so I don't think I would have necessarily like I actually asked the surgeon to go for a smaller size in advance. But this man is a sculptor. He's an
Yeah.
artiste of breasts. Definitely knows what he's doing because he was like, "We're going to go for the medium high profile." Just before I went in, and I was like, "Okay, I choose to trust him." And yeah, they're the perfect size for my body.
Yeah. Because
Um,
because you're so tall that without that it just doesn't look as natural as that.
yeah, yeah, they're huge breasts. Like I'm an E cup now.
Yeah.
Um,
What were you
but
before?
I
An
don't.
A
I'd
cup.
never been measured before. I hadn't even bothered to get a cup size. Might have been a B cup, or an A cup. But yeah, they don't look like an E cup on me because I am so large as well
Yeah.
around them. So yeah, really happy with how that's turned out.
And how is it? How is that? What's that meant for your reception as a woman? I guess both just in general conversation. I know that you were frequently misgendered before that surgery. Is that far less common now?
Yeah, yeah, really, it's really improved how people perceive me. Um, I am much less, I get misgendered much less. Particularly, really didn't like winter last year because wearing big warm clothes meant that my body just became kind of frumpy and large, and I think um, that was a cause of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And now that I have breasts, it really does eliminate a lot of that. People can just quickly receive me as a woman. And more often now, I'm actually getting comments that people wouldn't have guessed. I was actually at gymnastics the other day, and one of the girls told me that looked quite strong. And I was like, well, yeah, I do have a lot of muscles from living as a man for 25 years.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, really? I would not have guessed.
Oh,
And I was
lovely.
like, oh, wow, that's a surprise.
Yeah.
So things like that are fun experiences to have. Um, yeah, it was definitely a bit of a healing process. Um, but they're all well healed now, and I can use my chest still. Um, yeah, it's kind of funny with
So it just meant for a number of months you couldn't sort of you had to restrict your exercise and your movement and
yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't use anything that I couldn't do anything that would use my chest muscles. And because the implant goes underneath your pec. It's quite funny now because if I do anything that does use my chest muscles, they kind of like move. It's a bit of a party trick.
So that's not true for other women?
No,
Right.
no, yeah, I think breast tissue usually just grows on top of muscle.
Yeah.
But most women that get breast surgery will get the implant underneath the muscle just because it um, holds the shape better,
Yeah.
means you get more longevity out of them.
Does it mean you retain the sensation better, or that actually is irrelevant? You would have retained sensation in either case.
No, it's a risk with sensation. So because you're stretching the area so much, you're you risk losing or gaining sensation.
Right.
Like it, sometimes it stays the same. Sometimes it gets too sensitive. Sometimes it goes numb.
Right.
In my case, I've got like different areas where there is numbness, and some areas where it's like my nipple's probably a little bit more sensitive now, to the point of pain sometimes. Um, so yeah, but like it really there was a lot of stretching,
Yeah.
so it makes sense.
So has the sensation reached a point where, because, I guess one of the fears that people understandably have about surgeries, significant surgeries, is uh, that it ends up being painful long term, and they lose valuable sensation, especially when we're dealing with two important erogenous zones in the body. So in terms of just, has the sensation recovered and you're no longer in pain? And, I guess the fears we have about surgery and the things going wrong, you're now far enough down the track that you can say, not dealing with pain and it's all going okay.
Um, yeah, I like there's still little bits of pain, and like I just said, there's some areas of numbness and some
Yeah.
my nipple's more sensitive. Like that's just going to be what it is forever.
Yeah.
You take the good with the bad.
Still worth it, in other words.
Still worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah. I mean, it's it's not impacting me really negatively at all.
Yeah.
But if I totally lost my nipple sensation, I'd be more upset about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise it's all going well.
Yeah.
And I get to wear fun sports bras when I work out now, and yeah, it's good.
And so I don't know if we want to go down this path now, but the reception by men, has that been, because you've said a woman commented it, and we talked last time about your interest in men, has that been easier, or that's still complex because
men still like men definitely find me more attractive now, but there is still um a barrier for, I think, straight men in being attracted to trans women. Um, I mean, yeah, let's
does that-
save the dating experiences for another podcast.
Yeah, okay.
Because
Yeah.
we won't be able to spend too much more time.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's a whole conversation, and there's some fun things to talk about in there, so we can do that next time.
All right.
I have been dating, as a preface for people, a little bit of a cliffhanger for the next one, so watch out for that.
So in terms of an update for the last 8 months, what else would you like to talk about?
Yeah, well, I think I'm finally landing in a nice place psychologically now. I guess how like the metaphor I've been using to understand where I'm at is of the pendulum, and I feel like I've swung one way and kind of like found my way back to the middle again. So I'm really landing in a bit more freedom with gender is how I'd summarize it. And I guess the experience has begun, like the journey of being trans is I went from being quite masculine, to really overnight trying to emphasize my femininity, trying to release a lot of that masculinity. And
I mean, you go non-binary at first for a period, which
no,
was sort of a combination, really, wasn't it? At the very first.
no, I socially transitioned to women. I used she, her pronouns straight away. I
Right.
chose a feminine name. I was dressing womanly. So I never went non-binary. I always went
I
to
feel like in the
woman.
very early stages, you were wearing some masculine and feminine clothes. Like, maybe that was maybe before you came out as transgender.
No, that was just before I had fully updated my wardrobe, and I was,
Okay.
and but also, yeah, maybe you need to do my educational 101, Dad, because your presentation and your gender identity
Yeah.
are not the same.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
have been dressing a bit more androgynously when I
Right.
first started, but I always identified as a woman.
Straight away. Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that I identify as non-binary now, although my
No.
self-understanding might be more so in that space. But yeah, because when I first a lot of the way that I was brought up was very masculine, and I did a lot of masculine activities. So when I first started transitioning, I started to um, really try and avoid a lot of those things that made me feel masculine. Um, like, in my rock climbing, where I was really trying to be strong and put on muscle, like I stopped doing that. I stopped, like, it was quite difficult because, particularly at first, all of my movement practices made me feel quite masculine in my body because the way I moved was
Was
quite
strong, strength
masculine,
based.
was very powerful. And so I had to take a break from all of those things to really like explore and rediscover for myself anew what it was that really was important to me and brought light into my life. Um, and so yeah, for a while, I mean, I got into making music and I've really explored more of my creative side a lot more, which has been beautiful. But for a long time, I was not doing a lot of the things that I also loved.
Yeah. So you've
Um,
given up
and
a pleasure, which means life's
yeah,
less fun.
yeah, it definitely added a difficulty. A lot of my coping mechanisms I let go of, which were like getting away from work and moving my body. But also like things like demonizing myself for my voice when I had a deeper voice, and there's a tendency that all trans people fall into to constantly, not maybe not all trans people, maybe more so trans women because our voice doesn't change, but um, where we can become very hyper aware of how we're sounding all the time. And that's quite exhausting, quite hyper aware of how we're moving our bodies and being perceived and always trying to like feminize. And um,
Which must get exhausting.
it is, it's so cognitively demanding all the
Yeah.
time. It was a lot. And the
Because you can't
problem
just
being
be.
that then I would go to like my music festivals, my Buschdorfs that I love going to, which were previously a place where I could really let go of all of these social rules that we've put on ourselves and just frolic and just be whatever shade of self I wanted to be in that day, and just connect with people. Uh, it was really hard for me to arrive in those spaces and be myself because I was so aware of the ways that I might come across as masculine to people and really trying to be perceived as a woman. And there's a danger in trying to control how people perceive you because it's impossible. And so,
Well, and maybe even people recognize when you're trying too hard, it feels forced or fake, or so
yeah,
it could almost be self-defeating, couldn't it?
totally. And I think in the initial stages of learning a new anything, learning a new language, or in my case, a
Yeah.
way of
Well,
being,
well,
it is forced.
gender's a performance, and
Yeah.
it's a topic we'll talk about one of these weeks with Judith Butler and things. But gender's a performance that we learn for most of us unconsciously. We just model it from our mothers or fathers and from those around about us. But you've had to adjust that performance because you've unconsciously developed it another way, and then you're constantly having to think about performing in the social
In
environment
the other
rather than
way.
just being.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, gender is so abstract. It's like
Yeah.
as soon as you start getting into conversations with people about what is feminine and what is masculine, the conversation very quickly falls apart.
Yeah. So
Because you're
how do
like,
you
well, why is
perform it
that
when we
more
don't even know
feminine?
what it
Or why
is?
is that more masculine?
Yeah.
And it's actually
Yeah.
nigh impossible to talk about.
Yeah.
And the place I've come to is useless for myself in understanding myself. Um, and I was even reflecting on this last night. I feel like in many cases, um, you know, cisgendered men and women are also dealing with the same kinds of
Yeah.
feelings of I'm not man enough or I'm not woman
Yeah.
enough. And for what? For some strange notion that we've ascribed to masculinity or femininity, Um, when reality, you are what you are, whether or not you are embracing certain values that other people have ascribed to a category or not. So yeah, it's a sticky place, gender. But I was at a bush stuff recently over Easter long weekend, and I was
What's a bush tuff for those who don't know?
oh, I'm sure anyone who has listened to this podcast, I've talked about it many times,
Yeah.
but bush duffs are a festival out in the forest with duff duff music. It's exactly what it sounds like.
Yep. Okay.
So, loud, more electronic music on the more intense end of the spectrum, for really dancing and, um, yeah, there's amazing light shows and it's a very hippie, spiritual space. A lot of, um, yeah, free expression and markets and workshops for yoga and breath work and stuff like that. It's a
Yep.
it's a
Anyway,
very
sorry to interrupt,
hippie
but
space.
I thought it might help people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so I was at this bush off, and feeling very restricted in myself because I was trying to perform gender, and um, it got to like the second or the third day into it, and I was just like, this is exhausting, and this, like, I'm very aware of how different I can show up in this space as a result of me trying to be some ways and not others. And so I just decided to let go of that. And I had an amazing experience of traversing like my expression, um, while still doing a lot of the things that I have learned to love throughout my life, like freestyling with my friends. And when I freestyle, I go into my deep gangster voice because it's hard not to rap in my full timbre.
I was about to ask you what freestyling is, but thank you. I can work it out
Freestyle
from
rapping, yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
which is like, when there's big bassy beats happening, it's so fun to do that with your friends. And
We've got some
also,
great video of you and Lachlan doing a form of freestyling over the Christmas
yeah,
and New Year
some good
period.
dancing, yeah.
Um,
And so this is like a lot of what I love to do
Yeah.
is stepping into that improvised, expressive space, whether it's in dance
which of
or
course
in
doesn't have to be masculine
poetry.
or feminine, but
No,
because it was for you, it was the voice part of it that was presenting as especially masculine.
yeah. Well, the difficulty is that expression doesn't have to be either, but in our social world,
Yeah.
it is first and foremost for many people the first way that we categorize people.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the performance part comes in. It's because I'm aware that other people are gendering me based on aspects of myself. I'm always trying to curate it so that they see me how I feel. And that's
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
But also there was a half pipe out in the bush.
Yeah.
And I can skate half pipe pretty well. And what a cool experience to be able to skate a half pipe out there, while there's amazing speakers playing bass music. Um, and so I just wanted to do stuff like that and just,
Yeah.
part of the joy of being trans, that I'm learning is that I get to, I have experiences that most cisgendered people haven't had. And so I can level with boys and girls, equally,
Yeah.
in most cases. And so I don't want to lose my ability to I don't know, vibe with boys in ways that are like watching each other skate and egging each other on, because
Well,
that's a
apart from everything
human
else, a couple of your
experience.
best friends are your brothers.
Yeah. I have brothers. Like a lot of my best friends are men.
Yeah.
And
Max and
yeah. So I have that was the first experience over Easter long weekend of me kind of like reconnecting with my masculine. And then since then, it's been a number of weeks of integrating and kind of feeling this tension in myself as a trans woman of like trying to make peace with that, and accept that maybe I won't fit perfectly into this cisgendered female, norm, and therefore maybe I won't totally vibe. Maybe I won't totally have a seat at the table with all cisgendered women, and maybe I won't totally get invited down to a romantic dinner with a cisgendered man. But it's the important thing is my own joy and, my own joy in myself And um, yeah, it feels like I'm finally landing in the space where I can nurture all of the multifaceted
Yeah.
aspects of myself, um, and really play again. And like, I love fashion. I love feminine fashion. I love dressing up, but I also don't like spending as much time getting ready or thinking about fashion as some of my girlfriends do. And I've been policed as a woman, and like it's so funny stepping from being policed as a man into stepping into being policed as a woman. And I was kind of like, I didn't do this journey just to take one mask off and put on another mask. Like, I don't want to, like, I'm not going out to parties to attract people just for how cute I look. Um, I
Yeah.
want to look cute, but I actually want to attract someone for some amazing phrase that I've just come up with off the top of my head to explain some human experience that we're having. Like, that's how I want to attract people.
Yeah.
Um,
Which should be true for all of us, and probably generally
Well, it doesn't have to be
is.
true for all of
No.
us, because
Yeah.
some people, it's totally valid to want to attract people with our bodies or the way that
Yeah.
we're moving in a sexual way or the clothes that we're wearing. Like, that's a style of self,
Yeah.
right? And for me, my femininity, my womanhood isn't just that. For me, my womanhood um, is more in the ways, like I was saying, of how I want to express myself, of how I can play in the moment with um, improvising expression um, or with words. I like being creative,
Yeah.
and so that's where that's I guess the sense of self that I'm now finally learning to nurture. And I think that my way of understanding myself is actually through now letting go of the masculine and feminine as concepts for understanding myself. And therefore, I'm kind of stepping into a non binary space in my sense of self, although I'm not going to identify as such, because I still like how the label of woman fits for me in myself.
Yeah. I was going to
Um,
ask because so you talked about a pendulum swing where you push toward the feminine more, and now so you start with the masculine, you push toward the feminine, and you're trying to find this middle space. I guess then the question is, well, did you need to go through the surgeries and transition to arrive at that? And let me interpret it and see if you're right. And the answer is, well, I still am a woman, but I'm now recognizing that I don't have to define that woman, that what it is to be a woman in really narrow ways. Have I interpreted that right? Or, how do
yeah.
you, yeah,
Well, yeah, I think it's a very nuanced interpretation because, um, for one, like the starting place is I'm really happy with the body I have now. It's
yeah,
amazing. I love that I finally get to have the body that I always wanted. Um, so the surgeries have been really amazing for that. Um, but also, there are some difficulties with particularly bottom surgery, um, where it's not as easy for me to enjoy sex as it used to be,
yeah,
because previously my body was designed to experience sexual
yeah,
pleasure, and now it's been manipulated by humans,
yeah,
um, and it doesn't operate it in the same way that other vaginas do. And while it's amazing in so many ways, there are difficulties with that, and I do wonder how, um, if I'd been able to express all parts of myself from an early age, would I have wanted that surgery? I don't know. Um, but it doesn't necessarily matter to me, because this is and has been my journey.
yeah.
And in
Okay.
order for me to get to where I am now, I had to go through that surgery.
Yeah.
And where I am now is amazing.
Okay.
Um, and
Because I hear that and I sort of think, oh, does that mean we went through the surgery too quick? Or,
um, if I hadn't gone through the surgery, I might be at this point still feeling incredibly dysphoric in my body.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
how would you answer that question? It's
yeah,
like, we've remember the first podcast and we were like talking about what questions are useful and not.
yeah,
And it's the same with
yeah,
all journeys of human
yeah,
exploration, of coming to understand ourselves.
yeah,
And I think it's an important point to make, because um, amongst all of these debates that we're having about transgender rights and gender affirming care, it's always coming back to this like moral idea that we have of like making a mistake, doing the wrong thing. And in the case of human exploration, where you're not actually hurting anyone else, like what is the wrong thing? The thing that's wrong is doing something that isn't aligned with who you are. And in my
Yeah.
case, I've been following very much the path of this, this is the next step for me. This is the next step for me. And I'm very well considered in everything I've done. So I
Mm.
definitely don't regret the surgery. I'm living with both the joys and pains of change.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the interesting thing for us to talk about is like, how can we support and let people explore without fearing that they're making mistakes? Because at the end of the day, whether someone's pendulum, whether they've pulled it up too far to the right
Yeah.
and then they have to let it go and it swings all the way super far that way, it swung that way because of how far it was this way in the first place.
Yeah.
And no matter which way it swings back and forth, the pendulum is still moving forward.
It's the Earth. Have you seen the pictures of the Earth rotating around the sun? And you think it's going in circles, right? And then what you discover is actually the sun is rotating around the universe, and it's all rotating each other and actually moving in a
Yes.
direction.
Yes.
So there's a sort of a 3-4D vision of the sun and the rotation of the planets around one another, and forward motion is more of the driving force than just pendulum or circular
Yeah.
movement. So
It's not a circle, it's a spiral.
yeah,
It's all spirals.
yeah,
Because no matter,
I think
you never
this
come
is
back to
such
the
an
point of
important.
origin.
This is such an important topic because I think the big fear, we started talking about gender affirming care and concerns about it. And the big fear is that people will make mistakes that they regret. And again, that's based on an assumption that life is just backwards and forwards to your starting point. And life is about making choices that we feel are right at that point in time. And one of the things we said in a very early podcast is you're more likely to regret the choices that you didn't have the courage to take than the ones that you took boldly and weren't quite sure where they might lead you. And then even in that case where you take that step and wonder, then that's the step that you've taken and you build from there, and it can and will be good.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it will be what it will be what it will be. Good or
yeah,
bad is almost a useless phrase because it might be bad first and then it'll be good, or it might be good first and then it will be
yeah,
bad because the
yeah,
pendulum inevitably swings back and forth between the two. And it's about how you learn those lessons. It's about acknowledging where you've moved relative to where you were before and saying, okay, before I had this question, now that question's answered.
yeah,
Now I have this next experience to deal with.
yeah,
And how do I get through that? And then it'll be a new pendulum that you pull up this way. And then you'll find the next swing and you'll keep spiraling until I don't know, until the sun makes its way the whole way around the
yeah.
Milky Way.
It's so good because, we're talking about transgender and we're talking about change, but I meet so many people who deal with, I shouldn't have made that decision, or why did I date that person, or and we're trapped in these cycles and just failing to recognize life is both long and short and a journey, and the key is to embrace whatever decisions we've made in the past because they've formed who we are in ways that may have been painful, but gosh, we learned a lot through that. So forget the whole regret. Let's become who we are and become richer and more interesting and more open to pleasure and pain as we step forward and move into the next thing in life. So
Yeah.
we're
We're
not
only
just talking
human.
about transgender choices here. We're talking about the challenge of all of our choices, which really are about what are we doing with these bodies in this world in
Yeah.
one way or another.
Yeah. It's all about working out how to be the most human version of ourselves. because we just need to give ourselves some grace where we will make mistakes
Yeah.
because we are human,
Yeah.
because we're only human and we're not perfect. And we might have some things that make us great, but we definitely have some things that make us bad too. And we're never going to escape those things. That our shadow is as much a part of ourselves as the light part of ourselves are too. So yeah.
I reckon that must be the place to finish, Jem. We said we were going to do a short half-hour podcast, and I'm pretty sure we've done a bit longer than that. But
Yeah, we've done about 45 minutes.
that's you and I. A little bit long-winded, but hopefully there's some meaning in the midst of that. Hey, great to see you all again, and we will be back in a shorter period than 8 months, we promise.
Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.
Peace. The Change Podcast. Everything changes, everything stays the same.